My brother married my cheating ex, got her pregnant, and then had the audacity to ask me to forgive them. So I did something they'll never forget. I've never been the type to lead with emotion. Never have been. My job is to walk into situations where everything has burned to ash and still find the single thread that holds it all together. Law firms call me when a case is already dead to reconstruct the truth from the wreckage no one else bothered to preserve. I read gaps. I read contradictions. I read people. And that's exactly why what they did to me cut so deep. Law firms bring me in when a case has been burned down to ash and they need someone to reconstruct what actually happened from the raw material nobody else bothered to preserve. I read gaps. I read contradictions. I read people. Which is exactly why what happened with Celine and Darius hit the way it did. Not because I didn't see it, but because some part of me chose not to look. Celine Arkwright came into my life at a professional gallery event 3 years before any of this. She was a textile art appraiser, the kind of person who could walk into a room full of woven pieces and tell you within 4 minutes which ones were investment grade and which ones were decorative flattery. Sharp eye, sharper instincts about people in rooms and where she fit in both. I liked that about her immediately. She didn't perform. She just occupied whatever space she walked into. Like she'd already decided it was hers. We were together for 3 years. I trusted her the way I trust things I've examined carefully and found solid. For me, that's not a small thing. My brother Darius is 2 years younger than me. Commercial land surveyor. Good at his job when he stayed focused, which was inconsistent. He'd been operating in my professional orbit for years, calling me when he needed an introduction to someone, leaning on my credibility when a deal needed a name attached to it that people recognized, borrowing money twice that he repaid once. I didn't resent any of it. He was my brother. That was the whole explanation. That was the whole mistake. I came back early from a work trip on a Tuesday in October. Nothing dramatic. A meeting got rescheduled. I caught an earlier flight. I drove home. Darius's truck was in my driveway. Not unusual. I'd given him a key 2 years prior when he was doing some work near my area and needed somewhere to leave equipment overnight. I'd never taken it back. I walked in. I heard something. I won't describe it further than that. I sat down at the kitchen table. I made 2 cups of tea, one for me, one by habit. I sat there for a long time, long enough for everything I hadn't consciously admitted to myself to surface and arrange itself into a shape I could look at clearly. When Celine came downstairs, I was still sitting there. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs when she saw me. Her face did the thing faces do when the version of events someone prepared for turns out to be wrong. I looked at her. I said, "We're done." No volume, no speech. She started to say something and I held up one hand and she stopped. I picked up my cup, took it to the sink, rinsed it out, and went upstairs. Darius was already gone. I heard his truck pull out while I was sitting at the table. I gave Celine an hour to clear out what she needed. She left without another word. I don't know if she expected more from me. I had nothing more to give her that would have served either of us. What came after the exit was worse than the exit itself. About a week later, I was closing out a shared expense account I'd maintained with Celine during a period when her appraisal contracts had dried up and she needed the float. Standard thing, just a joint account I'd set up to cover shared costs while she stabilized. I was removing my access when I noticed the history. Withdrawals, small ones at first, then larger, running all the way back 22 months. I pulled the full statement. I went through every line. I cross-referenced the dates against memory. Trips she'd taken. Time she'd said she was working out of town. A weekend in March she said was a client visit that I now understood completely differently. The money wasn't the wound. The timeline was. This wasn't something that slipped and became a problem. This was something maintained, protected, and hidden across nearly 2 years of my life while I was sitting across from her at dinner and sleeping in the same bed and building what I believed was something real. I closed the account. I saved the records. I said nothing to anyone. 3 weeks later, a property investment alert I'd set up months earlier pinged my phone. A land parcel I'd flagged as a potential opportunity, one I'd walked Darius through personally, explaining why the location and filing window made it worth watching, had just registered a change of ownership. Darius's name was on the deed alone filed the same week I was on that work trip. I sat with that deed notification for a long time, not because I needed time to understand it. I understood it immediately. I needed time to fully absorb the specific quality of it. The calculation involved because filing the deed the same week I was out of town wasn't coincidence and it wasn't impulsive. It was timed. Someone knew my schedule, knew the filing window, and moved deliberately inside the gap. That's not a mistake that happened in a moment of weakness. That's a plan that required patience. I saved the notification, added it to the folder I'd already started, closed my laptop, and made a decision that I've since come to understand was the most important one I made through all of it. I decided that nothing I did next would be driven by how I felt, only by what I could prove. The speed of what followed told me everything I needed to know about how long this had actually been running. Within 3 weeks of my exit, Darius and Celine were visible together. Not carefully. Not with any apparent awareness that discretion might be warranted. Openly. The way people behave when they've been waiting a long time for permission to stop pretending. They showed up at a mutual friends gathering together. They were photographed at an industry event she'd previously attended with me. There was no transition period. No respectful pause. Whatever they'd been to each other in private simply transferred to public without friction. That told me the relationship wasn't new. The public version was. The family response was not what I would have chosen to hope for, but it was exactly what I expected. My parents didn't take sides directly. They took the path that created the least immediate disruption, which meant applying pressure to me. I was the older one. I needed to be mature. Darius had made a mistake, yes, but he was still my brother. These things happen in families. Did I really want to let this fracture everything? The subtext was never subtle. My refusal to absorb what happened and move past it was the problem. Not the 2 years of deception, not the deed filed in my absence. My unwillingness to make everyone comfortable again was what was straining the family. I didn't argue with any of it. I listened, said very little, and let them believe what they needed to believe. 6 months after I walked out of my own kitchen, Darius and Celine got married. Small ceremony. I was not invited. I found out through a photo a cousin texted me by mistake and then immediately followed with 3 apology messages. I replied to none of them. I looked at the photo once, noted what I needed to note, and deleted it. 8 months in, Celine was pregnant. That changed the family's geometry completely. There was now a baby involved. There was now a unit with a future attached to it, and the family had quietly reorganized itself around that unit the way families do when the alternative is too uncomfortable to maintain. Darius and Celine became the gravitational center. I became in the family's collective narrative the one who was still holding on to bitterness. The one making everyone else walk on glass by refusing to let things go. I let them think exactly that. I relocated 4 hours away. Found an apartment in a city where I had professional contacts but no personal history. Told my parents I needed space to work through things, which was true, just not in the way they understood it. I set up my new office, built out my new network, and spent the better part of a year doing what I do professionally. Reconstructing what actually happened from every piece of material I could access and preserve. Bank records, the full transaction history from the shared account, exported and cross-referenced against a timeline I built manually. Communication logs from a joint email account Celine and I had used for shared household expenses, which she'd apparently forgotten I still had read access to. Property filing documents pulled from public record. I went through everything with the same methodology I'd apply to any case. No assumptions, no editorializing, just documentation and sequence. Through a professional contact I trusted completely, I retained a document authentication specialist, someone whose entire practice involves examining signatures, timestamps, and filing records to determine whether what a document claims to be is what it actually is. I gave him 3 specific items to examine and told him to take his time. What came back was not surprising. It was just finally confirmed. The financial architecture behind Darius's new life, the house deposit, the wedding, the land acquisition, the whole constructed picture of stability he was presenting was built on shortcuts that crossed well past ethical into legally actionable. The document specialist report was precise, sourced, and watertight. I didn't move on it. I drafted a formal regulatory tip, attached the relevant documentation, and filed it with the appropriate body. Then I left it there sitting dormant like a key I'd cut and hadn't decided when to use yet. From the outside, I was a man 4 hours away from his family who'd gone quiet after a painful breakup. Processing in private, probably still hurting. I was fine with that read. Almost exactly 1 year to the week after I sat alone in my kitchen with 2 cups of tea, my phone rang. Unknown number. I looked at it through 2 full rings before I answered. The voice on the other end was careful. Practiced the specific cadence of someone who rehearsed a call before making it. Celine said, "I know this is out of nowhere, but I think we need to talk." I didn't answer. Not that call. I let it ring out, set my phone face down on the desk, and went back to what I was working on. She called again 20 minutes later. I let that one go, too. The third time, 2 days after the first, I picked up. I said, "Celine," just her name, nothing else. I wanted to hear what she'd built before I gave her anything to react to. She'd prepared for this. That was clear within the first 30 seconds. The pacing was too even. The word choices too considered. She said things had been difficult lately. That Darius was under a lot of pressure. That she'd been thinking about family a lot since the pregnancy. About what kind of environment she wanted the baby to grow up in. About how she didn't want her child to have an uncle it never knew. She used the word healing once and then apparently deciding she liked it. Used it again. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, I said, "I appreciate you calling. Let's meet somewhere and talk properly." The exhale on her end was audible. Relief she hadn't quite managed to conceal. "Yes," she said. "Yes, that would be really good." We met at a cafe 3 days later. Neutral ground, public, nothing that implied intimacy or significance. I was there first. I ordered coffee and sat facing the door. They came in together. I'd expected that. Darius wasn't going to let Celine run this meeting alone, either because he didn't trust her to manage it or because he wanted to read my face himself and couldn't do that from a distance. Probably both. Celine looked worn in the specific way of someone who'd been running on a particular kind of forward momentum and had recently felt it stall. Not broken, just recalibrated. Darius looked composed in the way that requires active maintenance. The confidence was there, but it was working. You could see the effort underneath it if you knew what to look for. I stood, greeted them both warmly, gestured to the seats across from me. We ordered. We did 4 minutes of surface-level conversation while the drinks arrived. Then Darius leaned forward slightly, just enough to shift the meeting into its real register, and began. The pitch was well constructed. I'll give them that. It was framed entirely around family, around the baby, around the idea that everyone in their lives had been affected by the distance between us and that it wasn't fair to keep carrying it forward. Celine spoke about wanting the child to grow up with wholeness around it. Darius talked about how much he missed his brother. He said, "I know what I did," once briefly without elaborating on what that actually was. An acknowledgement engineered to sound like accountability without carrying any of its weight. I sat across from them and listened with an open, considered expression and used the 40 minutes they were speaking to identify the actual ask. It took me about 6 minutes to find it. Darius needed access to a senior partner at a litigation firm I worked with regularly, a man named Corvin Ashby, who was involved in a land dispute proceeding that Darius was quietly on the wrong side of. Darius couldn't get a direct introduction through his own channels because his credibility in that space was already compromised. But if Cairo Vance, whose professional relationship with Ashby was solid and long-standing, reached out and opened that door, the conversation would happen. That was the transaction. The baby was the packaging. I let them finish completely. I looked at them both for a moment like I was genuinely moved by the effort they'd made to be here. Then I said, "You're right. This has sat long enough, and I don't want the baby caught in the middle of something it had nothing to do with." Celine's posture changed immediately. The specific physical release of someone who'd been braced for impact and received warmth instead. "Let me organize something proper," I continued. "A family dinner. Everyone there. Parents, cousins. The people who've been stuck in the middle of all of this. We cleared the air in one room all at once. Do it right." Darius looked at me and I watched something move behind his eyes. It wasn't gratitude. It was the recalibration of someone who'd come in prepared for resistance and was now adjusting to unexpected access. He recovered quickly and nodded. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Celine reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Cairo." "Really?" "Of course," I said. I drove home, sat at my desk, and spent 2 hours reviewing everything I had assembled over the past year. Every document, every record, every piece of the timeline. 2 days before the dinner, my document specialist sent a final message. He'd completed a supplementary cross-reference I'd asked him to run, tracing Darius's financial representations against public business filings. What it showed was not just historical misconduct. Darius had been actively misrepresenting his financial position to a new investor group in the weeks prior, telling them his disputes were resolved and his accounts clean. He was securing fresh capital on the back of a situation he knew was neither resolved nor clean. He wasn't just someone who had done wrong things in the past. He was still doing them right now. I didn't change the plan. I expanded the scope and I sent one additional invitation to the dinner to a man named Wendell Price, Darius's business partner, who I had very specific reasons to believe had not been told the full truth about where certain funds in their shared operation had actually come from. I booked the venue on a Wednesday morning. Private dining room at a mid-range event space, the kind of place that hosts retirement parties and milestone birthdays. Nothing that signals occasion beyond the fact of gathering. Deliberately not impressive. I wanted people comfortable, not alert. The room held 14 projection wall on the far end that the venue used for slideshows. I told the coordinator it was a family reunion dinner. She was warm and efficient, and I left a deposit that ensured she'd remain both. Then I made the calls, each one personal, each one calibrated. I called my parents first. My mother cried quietly for about 30 seconds before composing herself and saying she'd been praying for this. I told her I loved her and that I'd see her Saturday. My father said very little, which is how he expresses that something matters to him. I called both aunts, 3 cousins, 4 mutual friends who had spent the better part of a year carefully avoiding taking a position they'd now be relieved to put down. Wendell Price I called last. I introduced myself properly. We'd met twice before through Darius, but never spoken at length. I told him I was organizing a family reconciliation dinner and that I wanted to extend the gesture to people in Darius's professional life as well, that I thought it would mean something to Darius to see that the people around him were part of the healing, too. Wendell said that was a generous thing to do. He accepted without hesitation. I thanked him and hung up and moved on to the next item on the list. The night before the dinner, I laid everything out on my desk and went through it one final time. The sequence mattered, not just what was in the folders, but the order in which it would surface. I'd prepared a clean summary document for each seat. Time-stamped, sourced, written in plain language, nothing legalistic, nothing that required interpretation. The kind of document you hand someone when you want them to understand something fully and immediately with no assistance from you. Inside each folder, the timeline, the financial trail, the voice messages, the hotel records, the document specialist's authentication report. Everything organized the way I'd organize a case file for a client, with the assumption that the person reading it has no prior knowledge and needs to arrive at the correct conclusion on their own. I printed 12 copies, placed them in folders, set them in a box by the door. I arrived at the venue 90 minutes before anyone else. Set a folder face down at each seat myself. Connected my laptop to the projection wall and confirmed the display twice. Positioned the audio so it would carry to every corner of the room without distortion. I checked in briefly with the 2 men I'd booked as event staff, private security, both of them sourced through a firm I'd used professionally before. I told them where I wanted them stationed and under what specific circumstance I needed them visible. They nodded and took their positions in the hallway. Then I sat at the head of the table and waited. Guests arrive the way people do when they've been carrying tension for a long time and have finally been given a sanctioned reason to put it down. With visible relief, my mother held on to me for longer than usual. My father gripped my shoulder and said, "Good man," in a voice that told me he'd been wanting to say something like it for a while. The mutual friends were warm and slightly overeager, the way people get when they're grateful to have been included in a resolution. Nobody looked at the folders. Darius and Celine arrived last 7 minutes late together, unhurried. The timing of people who understand the value of an entrance. Celine was visibly pregnant, moving carefully, and the room responded to her the way rooms tend to respond to that particular visibility. Softened, opened. Someone near the far end said, "Look at you," in a tone of uncomplicated warmth, and Celine smiled, the smile of someone receiving exactly what she came for. Darius worked the room naturally. Handshakes, a joke with one of the cousins, a brief moment with my father that looked genuine from a distance. He found his seat, clocked the face-down folder in front of him without reacting, and looked across the table at me with an expression that I read clearly. He thought this was already over. He thought the hard part, getting me to the table, was the whole challenge, and he'd cleared it. Dinner was served. I was a composed and present host. I made an early toast, brief, warm, deliberately unspecific, and watched the table settle into the rhythm of a meal shared between people who'd missed each other. Conversations overlapped. Wine was poured. The folders stayed face down and unremarked upon, which is what happens when people are comfortable. They don't investigate what's sitting right in front of them. Darius ate well. He laughed twice at things that were genuinely funny and once at something that wasn't, just to demonstrate ease. He asked me about a case I'd been working on, something he'd heard about through a mutual contact, and I answered him with just enough detail to keep him satisfied. He nodded along like a man who had already gotten what he came for and was simply enjoying the remainder. I watched all of it. I noted all of it. And when the table was full and settled, and the main course was finished, and everyone was in the particular loosened state that comes from food and familiarity and the belief that the worst is behind them, I stood up. I tapped my glass once. The table quieted by degrees until the room was completely still. "I want to thank everyone for coming," I said. "I've done a lot of thinking over the past year, and I decided that if we're really moving forward as a family, then the truth should come with us." I opened my laptop. I pressed play. The first thing the room heard was Darius's voice pulled from a voicemail left on a mutual friend's phone 14 months ago, clear and unhurried, with a relaxed delivery of a man who believed he was speaking privately. "She doesn't know yet. Just keep it going a little longer. Once the land deal closes, Cairo won't have anything he can touch." 4 seconds. That's how long the silence lasted after Darius's voice finished playing. I counted 4 full seconds where 12 people sat completely still and the room held the weight of what it had just heard. Then I kept going. I didn't pause to read the table. I didn't give anyone space to interrupt or redirect. I moved to the next item with the same pace I'd use walking a legal team through a reconstructed timeline. Calm, sequential, no editorializing. I'd learned a long time ago that the moment you let emotion enter a presentation, you hand the other side something to argue against. I wasn't here to argue. "Go ahead and open the folders," I said. The sound of 12 folders opening simultaneously is something I won't forget. I walked them through it in order. The timeline first, Darius and Celine's relationship mapped against mine. Confirmed not by inference, but by documentation. Hotel booking records on the projection wall. Dates, locations. The card used to pay. The overlap ran 14 months deep into what I believed was a committed relationship. I didn't editorialize. I just let the dates speak in the order they occurred. Then the financial trail, every irregular movement, every shortcut that crossed from questionable into legally actionable. The money's origin, its routing, where it landed, and what it purchased. The house deposit, the wedding, the land acquisition. Each entry timestamped, each source cited at the bottom of the page. Wendell Price found his own company's name on page 4. I watched him located from across the table. The precise moment when his expression shifted from polite engagement to something much quieter and much colder. A transfer routed through his firm's operational account, diverted before it reached its registered destination. He hadn't known that much was obvious and immediate. He set the folder down very carefully and did not pick it up again. Then the voice messages. There were 3 of them total. The first was the one they'd already heard. The second was shorter. Darius, same contact 4 months earlier, confirming the timeline had been extended and that Cairo was still unaware. The third was Celine's voice, not Darius's. A single message 40 seconds long discussing what they'd do once the land was secured and there was enough distance from the fallout. Her own voice, her own words playing in a room full of people who had known her for years. Darius stood up. He started with this as completely and I raised one hand, not dramatically, just a clean single gesture and the 2 men stepped in from the hallway. The room noticed them immediately. Everyone understood what they were within about 1 second. Sit down, Darius. He looked at the 2 men, then at me. Then he sat. I took my phone off the table, opened the email I drafted and saved 3 days prior, and sent it. One button, I set the phone back down and continued talking. I had 2 more items in the folder to walk through, and 30 seconds later, my phone vibrated once with a delivery confirmation. Then Darius's phone lit up, then Wendell's. Then a cousin near the end of the table who had co-signed a minor but consequential document 2 years ago and had clearly been told it was administrative. Darius looked at his screen and something left his face. Not anger that came back within seconds. But for one moment there was just the unfiltered expression of a man feeling the ground beneath him disappear. His primary business account flagged, frozen, pending regulatory review. The tip I'd filed 11 months ago was now active, and the body that received it moved faster than he'd anticipated because I'd made sure the documentation I submitted left them very little reason to delay. Selena broke, not in the way people break in films, no single dramatic moment, no controlled collapse. It was messier than that and more real. She started talking and couldn't find the thread she meant to pull. She addressed the table, then her own hands, then my mother specifically, then the table again, explaining and apologizing in the same breath, circling back, her voice climbing in pitch with each failed attempt to land on something solid. There was nothing solid left to land on. I did not look at her once. My mother wasn't speaking. My father sat with both hands flat on the table and an expression I'd never seen on him before. Not anger, not grief, something beyond both of those that didn't have a clean name. The mutual friends had closed their folders and were looking at each other the way people do when they're trying to establish whether anyone else is seeing what they're seeing. Nobody was looking at Darius, not even his own parents. He stood a second time. This time he wasn't reaching for words. He was moving toward me across the table. The momentum of someone who has run out of every other option and has defaulted to the only thing left. It was part aggression, part something more desperate than aggression, and it closed the distance faster than most people in the room registered. The security was faster, clean interception, no escalation, no contact, nothing that gave Darius anything to reframe as provocation. He was simply stopped, held in place, and the room watched it happen in absolute silence. He didn't struggle. He looked at me over the shoulder of the man holding him and his face cycled through several things rapidly before settling on an expression I recognized professionally. The look of someone who has finally understood that there is no version of this conversation where they leave intact. I closed my laptop. I picked up my phone and put it in my pocket. I looked around the table once, not for effect, just a final read of the room. My parents, the cousins, the friends who'd been stuck in the middle for a year. Wendell Price sitting very still with his hands folded and his folder closed and the specific expression of a man already calculating his next call. I pushed my chair back and stood. Celine moved before I reached the door, not dramatically, but with a particular urgency of someone who understands they are watching their last window close. She got in front of me. Her voice dropped the performance entirely. And what came out was just raw. You're going to do this with a baby coming? You'd burn down your own family for? She stopped because I looked at her directly for the first time all evening. The room went very quiet and I said something. I looked at Celine for a long moment. Long enough that the room stayed completely still waiting. Then I looked past her at the table at everyone sitting there. My parents, the cousins, the friends, Wendell, all of them watching. And I said clearly enough for every person in that room to hear. You wanted a family again. Now everyone knows exactly what kind you built. I stepped around her and walked out. No pause at the door. No final look back. The security fell in behind me and the door closed. And that was the last time I stood in the same room as either of them. What followed isn't something I experienced dramatically. I wasn't there for most of it. I know the shape of it from my attorney, from Wendell, from a cousin who gave me a factual account a week later without editorializing. I'll relay it the same way. The room stayed at that table for almost 40 minutes after I left. Nobody rushed out. From what I understand, very little was said for the first several minutes. People just sat with the folders in front of them and the projection wall gone dark and the particular silence of a group that has collectively witnessed something they won't be able to put down easily. Darius and Celine left together. There was no scene beyond what had already happened. They just left. The regulatory review moved with the kind of efficiency that happens when you submit documentation that is organized, sourced and leaves very little room for procedural delay. Darius's business account remained frozen through the initial review period. The broader audit that followed was not fast. These things never are, but it was thorough, and what it found was consistent with everything I'd submitted. The new investor group, Darius, had been courting pulled back entirely within 72 hours of the dinner. Word travels in professional circles faster than people expect, particularly when someone like Wendell Price is making calls. Wendell dissolved the partnership formally within the month. He retained his own attorney and pursued a separate recovery process that I had no involvement in, but which from what I understand was not resolved in Darius's favor. The land dispute moved through civil process over the following 18 months. It was slow and procedurally tedious, and I want to be honest, there were stretches where I was tired of it. Not emotionally, just logistically. Legal processes require sustained attention and paperwork and follow-up. And none of it is satisfying in the moment, but it resolved correctly. My stake was recognized. I sold it through proper channels and used the proceeds to fund an office expansion in the new city. I didn't feel anything particular when the settlement came through. I noted it, filed the paperwork, and moved on to the next item. Darius and Celine's marriage survived. I want to be precise about that. Survived is the accurate word. They are still together, held in place by shared debt and mutual culpability and the practical reality that separation would require resources neither of them currently has in clean supply. I don't know what that looks like from the inside. I don't think about it often. Celine lost work, not through anything I arranged. 2 senior figures from the boutique agency she'd been building contracts through her at that dinner. And they made their own decisions about what those contracts were worth after what they'd seen. Consequence isn't always engineered. Sometimes it's just the natural result of people updating their understanding of who they're dealing with. My parents took time. My father came first, showed up in the new city on a Saturday about 2 months after the dinner. No announcement. We had lunch. We didn't discuss the dinner directly. He asked about the new office. I told him about a case I was working. We split the bill and he hugged me in the parking lot and left. That was enough. My mother needed longer. I understand why what she watched that night didn't just change her understanding of Darius and Celine. It changed her understanding of what the family had been for the previous 2 years while she was applying pressure to me to be the bigger person. That's a hard reconciliation to make. I haven't pushed her. She'll get there or she won't. And either way, it's not something I can carry for her. The night of the dinner, I drove home, made food, watched something on television that I couldn't tell you the title of now. I went to sleep without difficulty. I want to say that plainly because I think people expect the aftermath of something like this to carry its own weight, some residual emotional cost, some complicated feeling about what was done and how. There wasn't one. That's not numbness. That's what it feels like when you've been precise. A week after the dinner, a cousin texted me, "You knew exactly what you were doing the whole time, didn't you?" I read it. I didn't reply. There's nothing to add to a question that already has its answer. I'm back to full capacity at work now. New city, new office, same practice. A client came in last week with a situation everyone else had told him was too far gone to prove. Too much time had passed. Too many documents missing. Too many people who'd already moved on. He sat across from me looking like someone who'd been told to let it go so many times he was almost ready to believe it. I told him to start from the beginning and leave nothing out. That's what I do. I take things that look irreparably broken and I reconstruct what actually happened until the truth is documented, sourced, and impossible to reasonably dispute. I'm good at it. I've had practice. Cairo Vance, thank you so much for watching until the end. If you really like our videos, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Have a great day.